What's up, everybody? Brady Figueroa coming at you with another one of my favorite albums, and today we are talking about Gojira's criminally underrated fifth album, L'Enfant Sauvage, released all the way back in 2012. So, first things first, why do I think this album is underrated? The answer to that question is because it is essentially sandwiched in between the two Gojira fan favorite albums, 2005's From Mars to Sirius and 2008's The Way of All Flesh, and arguably Gojira's two most well-known albums, the two albums that propelled them to be as big of a band as they are now in the metal mainstream, 2016's Magma and 2021's Fortitude. As a result of that, I feel like this album kind of floats in that purgatory between still being kind of having elements of the more impenetrable, more progressive and technical elements of the prior two albums, while also still having a little bit more overall accessibility that obviously are more traits of the latter two albums. But for my money, it's these traits that make this one of Gojira's best albums, in my opinion. And this may just be my personal music taste, which, I mean, obviously that's what these favorite albums videos are about, but it just has the perfect balance for me of technicality, overall aggression and heaviness, and catchy fucking songs, groovy riffs that get stuck in your head and stay there. And all the while, this album still has the overall dark, brooding atmosphere that we've come to love from Gojira. So while metal purists and Gojira purists may not look at this album in as favorable of a light as they do their first four records, to me, these bands' traits, which are their droning aggression and their overall dark, looming atmosphere and their raw heaviness, are still fully on display here, just with a little bit catchier songs. And songs that aren't as drawn out and impenetrable like they would be maybe on Mars to Sirius or on Way of All Flesh, at least to someone who listens to more mainstream metal. And don't get me wrong, I love Way of All Flesh and I love Mars to Sirius and I also love Magma after it, but this album just hits that perfect balance for me. And it's also somewhat unique in the Gojira catalog because, for my money, this album really is the record as far as Gojira's entire catalog that is the most deeply entrenched in groove metal. Gojira very much do groove metal their own way, like in all the ways I just mentioned and all the traits that I would use to describe this album. It still is just Gojira's grooviest and catchiest album to date, in my opinion, riff-wise. Like, you listen to Mouth of Kala, and it is just monstrous groove after monstrous groove. That opening tremolo riff in particular is a favorite of mine on this album. The main chord progression of this song, too, that like dark triplet-based guitar riff there, I should say. Another awesome one. I love the overall darkness and emotions I get from that. And of course, you have that crushing breakdown at the end of the song that also fades out. Another one of my favorite parts on this album. And this is just one song. Like, the whole album, every single song on here has a memorable riff or groove at some point in it that will make you want to come back to that track. But something amazing about this album, and honestly Gojira's music in general, is that there are moments like this that register with you in multiple different ways, because they could be just raw heaviness and grooviness, like that main groove in the title track, or that final riff slash breakdown slash groove, whatever, at the end of the song. The axe kicks in at like the 2:53 mark. There's also that intense breakdown on the Gift of Guilt that happens at like the 2:23 mark. All of these moments are just killer fucking riffs that will get in your head and stay there and are perfect for a workout or a run or any kind of setting in which you would just need some fucking catchy ass riffs to keep you moving forward. But there's also the riffs and chord progressions on this album that give you just that looming and like intense sense of darkness and doom. Like Liquid Fire, it kicks in right at like the 40-second mark. That dark, again, just depressing and melancholic chord progression. I return to that part like crack. There's that clean vocal part on Planned Obsolescence that I love as well. Just the clean vocals, at least that Gojira does on this album, they're almost just as menacing as the full-on death growls are on here. The track Pain is a Master is another one of my absolute favorite tracks on this album. It is a great example of literally every point I've made about this album so far. This song still manages to be like a full-on, like, Gojira heavy, I don't know if I want to say death metal song, but just a classic Gojira song, their style of music, yet it still has this underlying uneasiness and tension to it. Like, you just go through how this song builds with that opening chord progression, another one of my favorites on the album. It's one of those chord progressions that like sounds so like almost calm and laid back, but like it also shouldn't feel that way, if that makes sense. Like that part just makes me feel anxious in like the best way possible. But even when the actual riffs kick in, like that dissonant main riff with that nasty bendy harmonic thrown in there, that part is just so beautifully ugly. Like it still like maintains that overall uneasiness and like it's building momentum. And even that barreling main riff with the double bass behind it, like even that, like it's again just such an aggressive riff, but it still feels like it's ascending and approaching like this real mean and ugly demise. I don't know. It's very hard to describe how the song makes me feel, as you could see. And on the topic of tension and tension building, I have to talk about Born in Winter, which just, again, is just constant tension building the whole time, although this track is a lot more laid back and doesn't really have any full-on heavy aggressive moments. But as a result, it really adds to the album because it's something different. Like that main moody chord progression and Joe's really like ominous, almost eerie sounding vocals that are very much performed in a lower register. That is just so unique to this album and honestly Gojira's catalog as a whole. And even when like the main music does fully kick in and you get Joe singing in more of like that higher register that's kind of on that strain and that line between harsh singing and clean singing, even that part still feels moody and ominous, and texture-wise the song really does feel like it's a cold winter's day and you're outside in like a blizzard. And it does a wonderful job of setting up the next track on here, The Fall, which is another one of my favorite tracks, not just on this album, but in Gojira's catalog. The main chord progression on this song is just an absolute beast. Like, it just looms and towers over you. And when those melancholic tremolo riffs get added on top, that is just such an awesome fucking collision of sound. Joe has some awesome vocal cadences and melodies in this song. Like, his first vocal cadences, I should say, his first vocal parts on this song are some of those memorable ones on the album. I also love in the verses when he's kind of going back and forth between like the death growls and again that kind of cusp of harsh singing and clean singing. Some of the absolute darkest melodies of the entire record are on this song. I especially love how they close with it. I think it's just such a powerful way to close the album. As far as other moments to highlight on here, I know I talked about Pain as a Master a lot, but another one of my favorite parts on the album is when that opening chord progression comes back later in the song and Joe has that awesome like belting vocal part that just, again, it just sounds so like sinister. It fits the song so well. The opening track on here, Explosia, although it is one of the longest track, I think it is the longest track on this album actually. A lot of memorable parts in it though. The riffing in this song, of course, you got the classic Gojira pick scrapes in that main one, but the rest of the riffing on here I find to be just really sludgy. Like that first like more chugging style of riff that you get after the main one, great. The one that closes out the song, although it is maybe a little bit drawn out, still awesome. The Gift of Guilt is a song that really just perfectly goes back and forth between, that real chugging style of riff and that more droning main chord progression, I guess you can call it. Those like dissonant guitar melodies on the Axe and on Liquid Fire I think are great as well. Those two tracks are one of those rare moments where like two songs could be next to each other in the track list and use slightly similar ideas but still feel unique and like they're contributing a lot to the album. I think literally the only criticism I could possibly think of for this album is that the instrumental track on here, The Wild Healer, doesn't really feel all that necessary. Like the kind of like bubbly melodies in the song are cool, but I don't know, it kind of derails the album's momentum a little bit for me. But that's just my taste. I mean, these type of tracks really don't do much for me in general, as you know, if anybody that watches my reviews is watching this video. So take that with a grain of salt because I'm just really picky about those tracks in general. But yeah, I mean, shout out to the two bonus tracks too, can't forget those. The main riff on This Emptiness very much brings more of those tech death sensibilities back to this album that were maybe a little bit absent. And then My Last Creation has this real sludgy, almost like hardcore influenced breakdown riff that I think is sick. But yeah, overall, this is a phenomenal album. Obviously, one of my favorite Gojira records. And if you're a Gojira fan that either likes more of their accessible stuff like Magma and Fortitude, check out this album because even though it is heavier than those two records, it definitely still will remain stuck in your head and will keep you coming back. Or if you're like a Gojira purist and a hardcore fan that prefers their older material, maybe give this album another chance because, especially given the context of Magma and Fortitude after it, which are a lot more melodic, you might look at this album in a different light. Or if you're someone that hasn't really gotten into Gojira, I think this album would be a great place to start because it really is like the middle between their entire scope of sound that they've had throughout their entire catalog. And there's just some catchy ass songs on here, like I've said at multiple points in this video. For me personally, this is one of my favorite albums to listen to when I'm focusing on something. Like I work in a kitchen and I have a lot of tedious prep to do. And when I'm listening to these songs with those chugging riffs and those dissonant parts and those melancholic chord progressions, it keeps me moving. And the overall dark atmosphere of this album always makes this a great one to listen to, like in wintertime when it's snowy and we're getting these blizzards here in the Midwest, which is why I usually end up revisiting it around this time of year in January and February. So yeah, check this album out if you haven't yet. If you have checked this album out and you're a fan of it, comment below your thoughts on it. I'd love to discuss it more. Remember to hit the subscribe button for more rock and related content. I got my Instagram, Spotify, and Threads links in the description of the video. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace.